In the heart of every medieval village, behind the low roofs of cottages and the wide stretches of farmland, there stood a place where iron and fire met. It was not always the grand hall of a lord, nor the bustling square of a marketplace, but rather a modest workshop, its doorway darkened by smoke, its walls lined with tools both simple and strong. This was the blacksmith's forge, the quiet but steady heart of the village's survival. The blacksmith's life was not a life of ease, but one of rhythm. It was the rhythm of hammer against anvil, of bellows breathing air into flames, of sparks leaping into dim light. To listen from a distance was to hear a steady song, one note repeated again and again, shaping not only iron but also the life of the community. Every plow that cut the earth, every nail that held a cottage together, every horseshoe that carried a traveler down the road, bore the mark of his labor. The blacksmith was not a man of luxury or fame, but of endurance, his hands rough with calluses, his clothes marked by soot, his face often lit by the glow of fire. Yet, within that labor, there was dignity, for without him, the fields could not be tilled, the carts could not be mended, and the rhythm of the village could not continue as we step quietly into his world. Let us listen to the sounds of his forge, watch the slow dance of his fire, and follow the movements of his day from dawn to dusk. His is a story not of grand battles or distant kings, but of patient strength, of iron shaped with care, of a life lived in service to necessity. It is a story of hidden rhythms, the quiet persistence that held together the very bones of medieval life. So settle in. Let the sparks glow softly in your imagination, and listen as the life of a medieval blacksmith unfolds before you, one strike of the hammer at a time. The first light of dawn in a medieval village was not greeted by silence, but by the slow stirring of countless small movements, the bark of a dog, the call of a rooster, the creak of shutters opening, the shuffle of feet across packed earth. Among these sounds, there was one place where the day began differently. While farmers turned their eyes to the fields and women stirred fires for the morning meal, a man with soot-darkened hands prepared himself for another day of work that would shape not soil, but iron. This was the blacksmith, and his forge awakened at dawn just as surely as the fields themselves. The blacksmith's cottage and workshop were often close to the heart of the village, for his labor touched every household. His building was simple, made of rough timber or stone, its roof covered with thatch or shingles, its doorway marked by a darkness that smelled faintly of smoke and iron. To step near it was to feel the warmth that lingered even from the previous day's fire, a heat that seemed reluctant to die. The forge was never entirely silent. Embers often glowed deep in the hearth long into the night, waiting for the first breath of morning air to stir them back to life. The blacksmith himself rose early, his body accustomed to the rhythm of work. His hands bore scars of past burns. His arms carried the strength of years spent lifting hammers, and his clothes bore stains that no washing could fully remove. He did not wake to luxury or ease, but to duty. Before the village stirred fully, he was already at his place, ready to coax the sleeping forge back into flame. He began by tending the fire. Ashes were brushed aside, embers uncovered, and with a practiced hand he laid fresh charcoal or wood upon them. The bellows, heavy and leather-bound, stood beside the hearth, waiting. With slow, steady movements, he pressed the handles, and the forge breathed once more. Air rushed into the embers, coaxing them into brightness, until the dark hearth glowed red, then orange, then brilliant with new life. The sound of the bellows was deep and steady, like the breathing of some great creature awakening, and with it the forge came alive, casting shadows against the walls and filling the workshop with warmth. The smell of the forge was unlike any other in the village. It was a mingling of smoke, ash, and hot metal, sharp and distinct. To those unaccustomed, it might seem harsh, but to the blacksmith it was familiar, almost comforting. It was the scent of his craft, the mark of his trade, the air he had breathed day after day. It clung to his hair, his clothes, his skin, until he himself seemed part of the forge. With the fire prepared, the tools were readied. The anvil stood at the center of the room, its surface worn smooth from countless blows, its body solid and immovable. Hammers of varying sizes hung within reach, their handles polished by years of use. Tongs lay arranged beside them, ready to grip iron too hot for bare hands. Buckets of water stood near, to cool the metal or quench the fire when needed. Each tool was humble, but each carried the weight of necessity. Without them, the forge was only a fire. With them, it was a place of transformation. Soon the first piece of work was chosen. Perhaps it was a plowshare, dull and chipped from long use, brought by a farmer who needed it sharpened before the day's labor. Perhaps it was a horseshoe, bent or broken, requiring replacement before a journey could begin. Or perhaps it was new work entirely, a nail to be made, a hinge to be forged, a blade to be shaped. Whatever it was, the blacksmith placed it carefully in the heart of the fire, watching as the color of the iron changed. At first dull, then glowing red, then bright orange, the metal softened, becoming ready for the hammer's song. The first strike of the day was always the most powerful. The hammer, lifted high, came down upon the glowing iron with a sound that rang clear across the village. It was a rhythm all the villagers knew, even if they did not hear it closely. The blacksmith's hammer was the voice of dawn, as much a part of the morning as the rooster's crow. With each strike, sparks leapt into the air, scattering like fireflies before fading into darkness. The iron bent, stretched, and yielded beneath the blows, its shape changing with each rhythm. This was no hurried labor. The work of shaping iron demanded patience. Too few strikes, and the metal remained unfinished. Too many, and it risked becoming brittle. The blacksmith's art was not only strength, but judgment, knowing when to strike hard, when to strike gently, when to return the piece to the fire, when to plunge it into water. His ears listened not only to the sound of the hammer, but to the pitch of the ring, for each tone revealed something of the metal's readiness. His eyes watched the glow, judging its color, its heat, its temper. His hands, though rough, felt the balance, adjusting the hammer's swing with care. By the time the village was fully awake, the forge was already alive with labor. Farmers passing on their way to the fields heard the steady rhythm of hammer on anvil and nodded in recognition. Children, fetching water or chasing chickens, paused to watch sparks fly from the dark doorway, their eyes wide with awe. The blacksmith's forge was both ordinary and magical. Ordinary because it was part of daily life. Magical because it transformed Earth's hardest element into shapes both useful and enduring. As the sun climbed higher, the forge grew hotter. Sweat beaded on the blacksmith's brow, trickling down his face, dampening his clothes. His arms ached from the weight of the hammer, but he continued, his body trained by years of repetition. He paused only briefly, wiping his face with the back of his hand, sipping water, then returning to the work. The rhythm never faltered for long. Each task completed led to another. Each piece of iron shaped led to another waiting. And so the forge awakened at dawn, not with shouts or bells, but with the steady breathing of fire and the measured voice of iron. It was a place where necessity was met with strength, where the simplest of tools became lifelines for the village. In the glow of the flames and the ring of the hammer, the blacksmith's day began, as it had for countless mornings before, as it would for countless mornings to come. The forge was not only a workshop, it was a heartbeat. And at dawn, when the rest of the world was just beginning to stir, its beat was already strong, already steady, already shaping the life of the village one strike at a time. Every craft has its language, and every craft has its companions. For the blacksmith, his language was the rhythm of metal and flame, and his companions were the tools that filled his forge. These were not lifeless objects, nor were they luxuries to be exchanged or displayed. They were extensions of his own body, silent partners in every task, carrying his strength where his hands alone could not. To step into the workshop of a medieval blacksmith was to step into a space where every tool had a place, every tool had a memory, and every tool bore the marks of countless days of labor. At the very heart of this world stood the anvil. Heavy, immovable, its body anchored in place on a thick block of wood, it was the foundation of all work. The anvil's surface was polished smooth by the blows of the hammer, yet dented here and there, each mark a reminder of years gone by. Its shape was not accidental. The flat top allowed for straightening and shaping, while its horn, the curved end, gave form to rounded pieces, arcs, and curves. The hardy hole and pritchel hole allowed for more specialized tools to be set into place, multiplying the anvil's usefulness. To the blacksmith, the anvil was not only a tool but a stage where every performance unfolded, a partner that received the hammer's strike and gave it back in a ringing voice that filled the workshop. Without the anvil, there was no forge, only fire and metal with no way to be shaped. Beside the anvil lay the hammer, or rather, many hammers. Each carried its own character. The blacksmith's main hammer was solid and heavy, its handle worn smooth where his palm had held it countless times. Its head was steel, one side flat for shaping, the other sometimes rounded or peened for stretching the metal. Smaller hammers allowed for delicate work, lighter strikes where precision was more important than force. Larger sledges required two hands, delivering blows so powerful they bent even the strongest iron into submission. To an outsider, the hammers may have looked simple, but in the blacksmith's hands they became instruments of transformation. The hammer's voice, ringing against the anvil, was the forge's music, each note different depending on the size and weight of the tool. Close at hand were the tongs, long iron arms ending in jaws shaped for different purposes. Some gripped flat bars, others round rods, others the narrow ends of blades. With them, the blacksmith could reach into the heart of the fire, draw out glowing metal too hot to touch, and hold it steady under the hammer. The tongs had to be strong enough to resist the heat, yet light enough to move quickly, for hesitation could ruin the work. Each pair of tongs bore the marks of burns and wear, blackened by flame, edges rough from use. Yet each was trusted, for the blacksmith's safety often depended on them. The bellows stood tall by the hearth, its leather sides and wooden frame waiting to breathe life into the fire. To pump the bellows was to feed the forge, to coax embers into flame, to turn flame into the white heat that softened iron. Each press sent a rush of air, the fire crackling in response, the coals glowing brighter, the sparks rising higher. The sound of the bellows was steady, a deep whoosh that seemed almost alive. Without them, the forge was no more than a household fire. With them, it became hot enough to bend the earth's hardest gift into any shape the blacksmith desired. Nearby stood the quenching trough, often a simple barrel or trough filled with water. Into this the blacksmith plunged his work, the glowing iron hissing violently as steam rose in clouds. The sound was sharp, sudden, almost startling, but to the blacksmith it was the sound of completion, of a piece hardened and finished. Sometimes the trough held oil instead of water, producing a different temper, a different strength. Its surface was always blackened, the water within carrying flakes of scale, the scent of iron rising with the steam. It was a humble vessel, but it held the power to transform hot, fragile metal into something enduring. Around the forge were smaller tools, each with its role. Chisels for cutting, punches for making holes, fullers for drawing out metal, swages for shaping curves. Each tool multiplied the blacksmith's skill, allowing him to do with precision what the hammer alone could not. Many of these tools were made by the blacksmith himself, born of the same fire and iron that filled his days. They were both product and partner, created in labor to serve labor. To hold one was to hold a piece of his own work, a circle of creation that never ended. Even the floor and walls of the workshop became tools in their own way. The floor, hardened by years of sparks and ash, bore marks of glowing metal dropped in haste. The walls, blackened by smoke, absorbed heat and light, turning the small space into a chamber of transformation. Hooks on the walls held tools ready to be taken. Shelves bore the weight of unfinished pieces. Corners stored the raw bars of iron that would one day become plows, nails, or blades. Every inch of the workshop spoke of purpose, of use, of the endless conversation between man and material. That to watch the blacksmith use these tools was to see a dance of precision. He moved between anvil and fire, between hammer and tongs, between bellows and trough. His body knew the distances without thought. His hands reached instinctively for the right tool. His ears listened for the tone of iron on steel. Each movement was practiced, but not mechanical. It was alive, adjusted to the needs of the moment, responsive to the language of the fire and the voice of the metal. Children who peered into the workshop often stared in wonder. To them, the tool seemed almost magical. How could a hammer turn a glowing bar into a horseshoe? How could the tongs reach into fire without burning? How could the bellows make flames roar so fiercely? The blacksmith smiled at their questions, but he knew the truth. It was not magic, but patience, practice, and respect for his tools. Each one was simple in itself, but together they formed a world of possibility. The tools of fire and iron were not only for the present moment. They carried memory. The hammer that struck a plow today might strike a sword tomorrow. The anvil that bore the shaping of a nail last week might bear the shaping of a wheel rim next month. The tools were constant, the work ever-changing. And in that constancy lay a kind of comfort. The blacksmith knew that whatever challenge the day brought, his companions were ready, waiting, silent until called upon, faithful until worn beyond use. When a tool finally broke or wore away, it was not discarded lightly. Often, the blacksmith melted it down, reshaping its iron into something new, giving it another life. In this way, nothing was wasted. The very tools of yesterday might live again in the tools of tomorrow, their spirit carried forward in fresh form. The forge was not only a place of making, but of remaking, a cycle of fire and iron that never truly ended. And so the forge itself was more than a building, more than a workplace. It was a world shaped by tools, each one simple, each one vital, each one carrying the hidden rhythms of labor. To stand within it was to feel the presence of countless days, countless blows, countless transformations. It was a place where Earth's hardest gift was made pliable, where necessity was given form, where man and tool together bent the world to survival. The tools of fire and iron were not grand or glamorous. They were humble, blackened, worn. But within their shapes lay the quiet strength of the medieval village. For every nail, every hinge, every plow, every blade bore the echo of their use, the rhythm of their blows, the hidden partnership between blacksmith and his companions. And in the stillness of night, when the forge was quiet, they waited silently in the dark, ready for the dawn, ready for the fire, ready for the work that would never end. The blacksmith's life was measured not in hours on a clock, but in tasks completed, in iron shaped, in the rhythm of hammer against anvil. From the moment the forge was coaxed to life at dawn until the last embers were banked at night, his day was filled with a ceaseless stream of labors. They were not glamorous labors, nor often recognized as heroic, but they were indispensable, woven deeply into the survival of the village. Every day carried its own list of needs, its own demands, its own challenges, and the blacksmith's work was to meet them, one piece of iron at a time. At the start of a day, his bench or wall might be crowded with requests. Farmers brought plowshares dulled by stones or cracked by hard soil. asking that they be sharpened or reforged before the next planting. Carters carried broken wheel rims or axles, knowing that without quick repair their wagons could not make the next journey to market. Shepherds arrived with tools bent or worn, small knives that needed a new edge, or hinges for pins that had grown loose. Even householders might request nails for a roof, hooks for hanging pots, or locks for storing grain. Every trade in the village leaned in some way on the blacksmith's work, and his labors touched all of them. Sharpening a plowshare was one of the most frequent tasks. A farmer would arrive early, the heavy iron carried over his shoulder or dragged behind him. The blacksmith examined it carefully, running his hand along the edge, listening to the farmer's account of how it had broken the soil and struck stones. Then the piece was placed in the fire, heated until it glowed, and laid upon the anvil. The hammer fell in strong, deliberate strokes, each one lengthening the edge, thinning it, restoring the sharpness that would let it cut the earth once more. Sparks flew with every strike, the rhythm steady, the farmer waiting nearby, watching with quiet hope. For without a sound plow, there could be no planting, and without planting, no harvest. The blacksmith's labor was therefore not just ironwork. It was the promise of bread for the winter. Horseshoes were another constant need. Travelers, merchants, even the villagers themselves depended on horses for transport and work, and without shoes those horses could falter on rough ground. Making a horseshoe was an art of precision. Bars of iron were cut, heated, and bent around the horn of the anvil, hammered into curves that matched the shape of a hoof. Nail holes were punched with care, each one evenly spaced, each one strong enough to hold. When finished, the shoe was cooled, fitted, and nailed by the farrier or blacksmith himself. The sound of nails driven into hoof echoed through the yard, a sharp counterpoint to the deeper ring of hammer on anvil. And when the horse trotted away, sure-footed and steady, the blacksmith knew his work had given speed and strength to journeys far beyond his forge. Then there were nails, small, countless, yet always in demand. Cottages needed repair, roofs needed fastening, carts needed strengthening. To make a nail was to repeat a small ritual, a slender bar of iron cut to length, heated until soft, hammered square, drawn to a point, flattened at the head. Each nail was quick to make but vital in use, for without them woodwork was fragile, prone to collapse. Buckets of nails sat ready near the forge, their number replenished constantly. Villagers came to buy them by the handful, and though they seemed small, they were the hidden joints that held the village together. Larger projects came less often but carried greater weight. A gate hinge might need forging, long and strong enough to bear the heavy timbers of a barn door. A sickle or scythe blade might be broken, demanding repair so that the harvest could proceed without delay. In some cases, weapons were called for: a knife, a spearhead, a hunting blade. These were made with the same care as tools, for in a world where survival was uncertain, the ability to defend or to hunt was as vital as the ability to plow. Each blade forged was not only a piece of iron, but a promise of safety, of endurance, of continuity. The blacksmith's daily labors were marked by repetition, yet never monotony. Each task, though familiar, carried its own differences. No two pieces of iron behaved exactly alike. The temperature of the fire shifted with each gust of air from the bellows. The quality of the iron varied from one bar to the next. The needs of the villagers changed with the seasons. In spring, plows and hoes crowded his workshop, demanded urgently before sowing. In summer, sickles and scythes filled his bench, preparing for harvest. In autumn, carts and wagons needed repair for carrying grain. In winter, hinges and locks, smaller tools, and mending work became more common. The blacksmith's labor followed the rhythm of the year, his forge echoing the cycle of the village itself. Children sometimes gathered at the doorway, drawn by the glow and the sound. They watched wide-eyed as the hammer fell, as the iron bent, as sparks danced like tiny stars. To them it seemed like magic. Dull iron transformed into a shining blade, rough bars shaped into useful tools. The blacksmith, though stern in his labor, often smiled at their wonder. He knew it was not magic, but patience, the steady repetition of skill learned over years. Yet he also knew that to see it for the first time was to glimpse something mysterious, something beyond the ordinary chores of village life. Throughout the day, the forge was a place of noise and movement. The bellows breathed, the fire roared, the hammer rang, the water hissed. The blacksmith's arms moved in steady rhythm, lifting, striking, turning, lifting again. Sweat darkened his brow, his shirt clung to his back, his muscles ached with strain. Yet he rarely paused, for the demands of the village were constant. Each task completed was replaced by another. Each need answered gave rise to the next. The forge was a place of ceaseless motion, its labors never fully done. And yet, for all its demands, the blacksmith's daily labor carried a kind of dignity. He was not shaping gold for adornment or jewels for vanity. He was shaping iron for life itself. His tools were not meant to decorate, but to endure. His work was measured not in beauty, but in usefulness. And in that usefulness lay strength, for without him the fields could not be plowed, the harvest could not be gathered, the carts could not move, the houses could not stand. His daily labors were the unseen foundation upon which the village rested as the day wore on. The forge grew hotter, the air thick with smoke and ash. The blacksmith's body grew weary, but his rhythm continued. Each piece completed carried satisfaction, not of pride, but of necessity met. The farmer left with his plow renewed, the carter with his wheel repaired, the householder with nails in hand. Each left with gratitude, often expressed simply, sometimes only in a nod. The blacksmith asked for no more, for he knew that his work spoke louder than thanks by the time the sun lowered in the sky. The pile of finished work stood as quiet testimony to the day's labor. Tools sharpened, shoes made, nails forged, hinges shaped, each one small, yet together immense. The blacksmith washed his hands in the trough, the water blackened by soot, his arms heavy with weariness. The forge, once roaring, was allowed to rest, its embers banked, its fire lowered. And in that stillness, the blacksmith looked upon his day not with boastfulness, but with the simple knowledge that he had done what was needed, that the village could endure another day because his hammer had struck and his fire had burned. The daily labors of the blacksmith were not heroic in the way of knights or lords, but they were heroic in their constancy, their necessity, their quiet strength. They were the pulse of survival, the hidden heartbeat of the village. And those centuries have passed, though machines now shape iron more quickly and easily. The memory of those labors remains, echoing in every hammer's strike, every ring of anvil, every hiss of quenched iron. If the blacksmith's hammer was the voice of the forge, then fire was its heart. Without fire there was no shaping, no bending, no life in the iron. The forge was more than a place of labor. It was a chamber of flame, where the hardest substance known to man softened into something pliable, ready to be given new form. To understand the blacksmith's life, one must first understand the fire. For every stroke of his hammer depended on its breath, its heat, and the sparks that leapt from it like stars in a private sky. The forge's fire began humbly, with embers carefully preserved from the day before. At dawn, when the blacksmith uncovered the hearth, he found the coals still faintly glowing beneath the ash, as though unwilling to surrender entirely to the night. With practiced hands, he cleared the ashes, coaxed the embers with fresh charcoal or wood, and pumped the bellows until the red deepened into orange, then into white brilliance. Slowly, the hearth came alive again. Flames curled upward, licking at the iron bars laid across, while sparks burst in brief showers before fading into the shadows. It was a rebirth repeated each day, a ritual of light and heat that marked the beginning of his labor, the fire itself was never constant. It had moods, temperaments, strengths, and weaknesses. Too much air from the bellows, and it roared wildly, consuming fuel too quickly. Too little, and it smoldered, reluctant to reach the heat needed for work. The blacksmith knew these moods intimately. His ear was tuned to the sound of the fire, the way it crackled when healthy, the way it hissed when damp fuel was added, the way it groaned when starved of breath. His eyes read the color of the flames and coals, from dull red to brilliant yellow-white, each shade revealing whether the metal was ready for shaping. His hands felt the warmth on his skin, telling him when to move closer, when to step back, when to feed the hearth more fuel. Iron itself was stubborn until the fire claimed it. A cold bar was rigid, unyielding, resistant to change. But when it was laid deep in the coals, covered by flame and air, it began to glow. At first it darkened, then flushed red, then brightened into orange. At the perfect moment, when it gleamed like the setting sun, it was ready. Too soon, and it would resist the hammer. Too late, and it risked crumbling, its strength lost in the excess of heat. The blacksmith's timing was therefore not mere chance, but the product of long experience, of countless days spent watching the color of iron as it surrendered to fire's embrace. When the heated iron was lifted from the hearth with tongs, it carried the fire with it. Its surface shimmered, alive with heat, glowing in the dim light of the workshop. The hammer's strike against it was answered not only with sound, but with light. Sparks flew in every direction, small fragments of brilliance breaking away from the larger whole, arcing through the air before fading to darkness. Each spark was fleeting, lasting only a heartbeat, yet together they filled the forge with a dance more beautiful than any lantern could provide. For the children who sometimes peered into the dark doorway, this was the most magical sight of all, the rain of fire that seemed to fall at every strike. As though the blacksmith commanded the stars themselves, the dance of sparks was not decoration. It was the sign of work being done, of metal yielding to the hammer's rhythm. They were born from the force of transformation, from iron being stretched, thinned, shaped. Each spark was a fragment of effort, proof that the hammer's blows were not wasted. To the blacksmith, they were familiar, expected, even ignored in the focus of his work. But to an observer, they were a wonder, a fleeting beauty that rose and fell with every sound of the anvil. The heat of the forge was constant, pressing against the blacksmith as he worked. Even in winter, when the village lay under frost and the fields slept in silence, the forge remained hot, its warmth filling the small space until sweat rolled down his brow. In summer, the heat became nearly unbearable, the air thick with smoke and flame. His arms glistened with sweat, his shirt clung to his back, his breath came heavy. Yet he endured, for without the fire there was no work, and without the work there was no survival for the village. The fire did not ask for comfort. It asked for respect, for vigilance, for sacrifice, and the blacksmith gave it willingly, for it was his lifelong companion. Fire shaped more than iron. It shaped the rhythm of the day. The blacksmith worked in cycles dictated by heat. He placed the iron in the fire, waited as it softened, lifted it to the anvil, struck it while it glowed, then returned it once more when it cooled. Over and over, this cycle repeated, each round of fire and hammer bringing the piece closer to completion. It was a rhythm that could not be rushed, for the fire moved at its own pace, and the iron yielded only when ready. The blacksmith learned patience from this rhythm, knowing that skill meant not only strength, but timing. Waiting for the precise moment when fire and iron were in harmony. The fire also carried a sound, a voice of its own. It hissed when damp fuel was thrown upon it, crackled when sparks leapt, roared when the bellows breathed air into its heart. Sometimes it sang softly, a low murmur as embers glowed. Other times it bellowed like a living beast, loud and insistent, demanding attention. To the blacksmith, this voice was as familiar as any spoken word. He knew when the fire was content, when it was restless, when it was fading, and when it was too fierce. The forge was alive, and its fire was its language. The sparks, though fleeting, left their mark. The floor around the anvil was pitted with tiny burns where they had fallen, small craters in the hardened earth. The blacksmith's clothes bore holes. His arms carried small scars, each one a memory of sparks that had kissed too close. Yet he bore them without complaint, for they were part of his trade, the cost of shaping iron. The sparks reminded him that fire, though necessary, was never to be taken lightly. It was both ally and danger, gift and risk, light and burn that eye in the quiet moments. When no hammer struck and the fire glowed steadily, the forge seemed almost peaceful. The heat filled the room. The coals pulsed gently, the bellows rested. The blacksmith could pause, wipe his brow, sip water, and simply watch the flames move. In those moments, the fire was no longer a tool but a companion, one that had shared every day of his labor, one that had burned for him when the rest of the village slept. To sit by it was to feel connected not only to his own work, but to the countless smiths before him who had also watched flames leap and sparks dance in the stillness. And so the daily life of the blacksmith was inseparable from fire. It was fire that gave iron its softness, fire that allowed the hammer to shape, fire that filled the forge with warmth and light. It was fire that produced the sparks, brief and brilliant, that marked each strike of labor. Without fire, the blacksmith's tools were silent, his anvil cold, his hammers idle. With fire, they came alive, and the hidden rhythms of survival echoed once more across the village. The dance of sparks was therefore not only beauty but memory. Each one rose, shone, and died within a heartbeat. Yet together they filled the forge with light, just as each day of the blacksmith's labor filled the village with strength. They were small, but they were countless, and they reminded all who saw them that life itself was made not of grand, lasting flames, but of countless brief sparks, each one vital, each one luminous, each one part of a greater rhythm. The life of a medieval village was made of many threads: the farmers who tended the fields, the shepherds who watched the flocks, the women who kept the homes warm and fed, the children who carried wood and water, the miller who ground the grain, the carpenter who shaped the timber. Yet running through all of these threads was one that touched them all, binding them together in quiet strength. That thread was the blacksmith. He was not a lord, nor a priest, nor a figure of grand power. His place was humble, his hands rough, his clothes stained with soot. But without him, the whole fabric of the village would weaken, for his labor gave form and endurance to every other trade. The blacksmith's role in the village was not only practical, but deeply communal. His forge was not hidden away in some distant corner, but often near the village center, close to the lanes where people passed daily. Its smoke curled into the sky, its hammer rang across the fields, its sparks glowed in the darkened doorway. It was a place everyone knew, a place where necessity and endurance were constantly renewed. The forge was more than a workshop. It was a meeting point, a reminder that survival was shared. Farmers relied upon him in ways too numerous to count. Their plowshares dulled with each season, their hoes bent against stones, their sickles chipped by countless stalks of grain. Without sharp tools, the earth resisted their efforts, and the harvest risked failure. The blacksmith restored their tools, shaped them anew, breathed life back into the iron so that fields could once more be sown and reaped. Each farmer who carried his plow to the forge knew that his livelihood depended upon the skill within those smoky walls. The blacksmith's hammer was as essential to the harvest as the seed itself. Carters and travelers came often as well. The wheels of carts broke under heavy loads. Axles cracked on rough roads. Horses needed shoes to carry them across stony paths. Without the blacksmith, the roads grew dangerous, journeys impossible. A cart without a sound wheel was as useless as a field without a plow. Each creak of a wagon, each steady step of a horse on iron shoes, bore the mark of the smith's work. His labor carried goods to market, messages between towns, families across distances. He was the silent companion of every traveler, the unseen partner in every mile. The carpenter, too, leaned upon the blacksmith. Timber might be shaped with saw and plane, but it was held together by nails and strengthened with iron hinges. Every chest, every door, every wagon, every stool or table bore some small piece of iron, often so ordinary that no one noticed it. Yet each nail, each hinge, each bracket was a quiet testament to the smith's hand. The carpenter shaped the wood, but the blacksmith gave it permanence. The two trades were bound together, each incomplete without the other. The miller's great stones turned with power, but even their iron was needed. The gears and fittings, the bands that held timbers in place, the tools used to adjust the stones, all required the blacksmith's craft. The baker's oven door, the shepherd's shears, the fisherman's hooks, the brewer's kettles, the mason's chisels, all of these bore the blacksmith's mark. His hand touched every trade. His labor echoed in every craft. He was not merely one worker among many. He was the worker upon whom all others leaned. Even the household depended upon him. A mother might come to the forge asking for simple hooks to hang pots, or nails to mend a roof beam, or a small knife for cutting bread and herbs. A father might request a latch for a door, a chain for a bucket, a lock for a chest. These were small things, but they carried weight. A roof kept out the rain, a latch kept out the wind, a knife prepared the meal. The blacksmith's work entered every home, unseen but essential. He was the hidden guardian of comfort and safety. Because of this, the blacksmith's forge was never empty of visitors. Villagers came not only to request work, but also to linger, to watch, to speak. The doorway of the forge was a place of conversation, where news was exchanged, where stories were told, where neighbors met. Children, too, gathered, drawn by the sparks and the sound, asking questions, marveling at the transformation of metal. The forge was alive not only with fire, but with voices. It was a place of labor, but also of connection that in times of hardship, the blacksmith's role grew even greater. When famine threatened, he worked longer to keep plows sharp and sickles strong, for every harvest counted. When storms damaged cottages, he forged nails and hinges without rest, so roofs could be repaired before rain returned. When disease thinned the village, he carried on, for even in sorrow, the fields needed tending, the carts needed wheels, the animals needed shoes. His work was constant, regardless of fortune or misfortune, and through that constancy he gave the village a sense of endurance that in times of conflict, his role could shift. Though not always called upon, he had the knowledge to shape weapons, knives, spearheads, arrow tips. These were not his usual labors, for the village relied more on tools than arms, but when necessity demanded, he could provide. Yet even then, the spirit of his work was not destruction but preservation. His blades defended homes, his iron points guarded fields. His skill gave protection where fear threatened. He was not a warrior, but his hands armed those who needed to stand as guardians. The blacksmith's relationship with the village was built on trust. His work was too important to be doubted, too necessary to be delayed. When a farmer brought a tool, he trusted it would be returned sharp and strong. When a carter brought a wheel rim, he trusted it would be sound once more. When a mother asked for nails, she trusted they would hold her roof against wind and rain. This trust was not spoken in grand words, but in nods, in handshakes, in the steady rhythm of exchange. The village gave him their iron, their payment, their faith. He gave them his skill, his strength, his fire, and in return, the village sustained him. They brought food in trade, grain and meat and cloth. They repaired his roof when storms tore at it, helped him when his arms grew weary, stood by him when misfortune struck. He was one of them, no higher, no lower, but woven tightly into the fabric of their survival. His strength supported theirs, and theirs supported his. The blacksmith and the village were not separate, but bound together in the quiet pact of endurance. When his hammer rang out across the morning, villagers felt reassurance. It was the sound of life continuing, of strength at work, of needs being met. When sparks leapt into the air, children laughed, farmers nodded, travelers smiled. It was a sight that belonged to all, not only to the smith. And when the forge smoked against the sky, its plume rising steady and sure, the village knew that their hidden heartbeat was alive and strong. The blacksmith and the village were mirrors of one another. He labored endlessly, unseen yet essential, just as the village itself labored quietly in fields and cottages, far from the eyes of the world. He turned raw material into form, just as the village turned toil into life. He endured heat and flame, just as the villagers endured cold and hunger. He bent iron to his will, just as they bent the earth to theirs. In his forge, the essence of the village could be seen: persistence, patience, quiet strength, and the unbroken rhythm of survival. And so the blacksmith and the village lived not as separate stories, but as one. Each depended upon the other. Each strengthened the other. Each carried the other forward through the endless cycles of seasons and years. The forge and the field, the hammer and the plow, the anvil and the harvest, all were threads in a single cloth. And when the day ended, and the forge's fire sank into embers, the village lay in quiet rest, knowing that tomorrow the hammer would ring again, and life would continue, steady as the rhythm of iron upon steel. No blacksmith could labor forever. His arms, though strong, would one day grow weary. His eyes, trained to judge the glow of heated iron, would dim with age. His back, bent over the anvil, would stiffen. His hands would lose their strength. His grip on the hammer would weaken. The forge, however, could not fall silent. The village still needed plows, nails, hinges, horseshoes, and countless other pieces of ironwork. Life demanded continuity, and so the craft had to be passed down. Apprenticeship was the bridge that carried the knowledge of the blacksmith from one generation to the next, ensuring that the rhythm of hammer and anvil never ceased. An apprentice did not simply appear by chance. Often he was a boy from the village, the son of a farmer, a carpenter, or even another smith. Sometimes his parents arranged it, seeking for him a trade that promised steadiness and respect. Sometimes he was sent to the smith as part of a bargain, learning in exchange for labor. In some cases, he might be kin, a nephew or cousin, carrying forward the family line of work. However he arrived, the first day of apprenticeship was a threshold, a step into a world of fire and iron, into a place that demanded discipline, patience, and endurance. The apprentice began with the simplest tasks, for no boy could hold the hammer with strength or wield the tongs with precision at once. His first duty was often to pump the bellows, feeding the forge's breath so the fire would burn hot. Hour after hour he worked, his arms aching from the effort, his clothes damp from heat, his face streaked with soot. It was tedious, thankless work, yet vital. Without the steady rhythm of the bellows, the fire would falter, the iron would cool, and the smith's hammer would fall on stubborn, unyielding metal. In learning to pump the bellows, the apprentice learned his first lesson, that no task was too small when survival depended on it. He swept the floor, gathering ash and filings, keeping the forge clear of clutter. He fetched water, carrying buckets from the well to the trough, making sure it was full and ready to quench iron. He stacked fuel, piling wood or charcoal near the hearth so that the fire would never want for breath. He arranged tools, handing the smith the right hammer or tongs when called for, watching carefully as each one was used. He ran errands for villagers, delivering finished work or carrying messages. These tasks might have seemed lowly, but they brought the apprentice into the rhythm of the forge, teaching him that labor was not only about striking iron, but about discipline, readiness, and attention to detail. Only after months, sometimes years, of these small labors did the apprentice begin to touch the iron itself. At first, it was small work, holding a piece steady while the smith struck it, turning it carefully with tongs, hammering lightly under the smith's guidance. His strikes were weak, his aim clumsy, the iron often slipping from his grip. But slowly his body learned. His muscles strengthened, his hands steadied, his ears tuned to the sound of hammer against anvil. With each mistake came correction, with each attempt came improvement. The forge itself was his classroom, the fire his teacher, the hammer his book. The blacksmith taught not with lectures, but with demonstration. The apprentice watched every movement, every decision. He saw how the smith judged the color of the iron, how he lifted it at just the right moment, how he struck with precision rather than brute force. He noticed when the smith paused, when he quenched, when he returned a piece to the fire. He listened to the ring of the hammer, the hiss of the quench, the sigh of the bellows. Slowly, through countless repetitions, he absorbed not only the motions but the intuition, the unspoken knowledge that no words could fully describe. Discipline was strict. The forge was no place for carelessness, for mistakes could burn skin, shatter iron, or ruin days of labor. An apprentice who dawdled or grew distracted quickly learned the weight of his master's stern words. Yet discipline was not cruelty. It was necessity. The forge demanded respect, and through respect came safety. Apprenticeship was therefore not only the learning of a trade, but the shaping of character. The boy who entered the forge emerged, years later, not only as a smith, but as a man shaped by patience, endurance, and respect for fire and iron. Over time, the apprentice graduated to larger tasks. He learned to make nails, the most basic but most necessary of ironwork. At first his nails bent or split, their points uneven, their heads too thin. But with practice, he produced nails strong and true, and in so doing, he mastered the essential rhythm of heating, shaping, and finishing. From nails he moved to horseshoes, learning to bend the iron into curves, to punch holes evenly, to shape the shoe to fit the hoof. He learned to sharpen plowshares, to repair broken blades, to forge small tools. Each task carried lessons. Each piece built his confidence, until his hammer strikes grew stronger, his movements more assured, his results more reliable. The relationship between blacksmith and apprentice was not merely that of master and servant. It was closer to that of father and son, teacher and heir. The smith passed down not only his skills, but his values, his understanding of the village, his sense of duty. Around the hearth, after the day's work, he explained why the plow mattered, why the horseshoe mattered, why the nail mattered. He taught that the smith's labor was not for glory, but for necessity, that his worth was measured not in riches, but in the survival of the village. These lessons were as vital as the strikes of the hammer, for without them the apprentice might learn skill but not purpose. Years passed in this way, the boy growing into youth, the youth into manhood. His arms thickened, his back straightened, his eyes grew sharp. One day he struck the hammer with the same confidence as his master. One day he shaped iron not under instruction, but with his own judgment. One day he repaired a plow, forged a hinge, made a blade, and the villagers nodded, satisfied, trusting his work as they had trusted his masters. The forge had gained a new smith, and the rhythm of iron upon anvil continued unbroken. When at last the master grew too old to work, his apprentice was ready. The tools passed from one pair of hands to another. The anvil rang beneath a new rhythm. The fire burned for a new generation. The forge did not falter, for its heartbeat was not bound to one man, but carried forward by many. The apprenticeship had done its work, ensuring that the village would always have its smith, that iron would always be shaped, that the hidden rhythms of survival would endure. Apprenticeship was thus more than training. It was the binding of past to future, the thread that wove generations together. Each blacksmith was once an apprentice, standing nervously at the bellows, straining to pump air into the fire. Each blacksmith had once fumbled with tongs, struck too hard, burned his hand, endured stern correction. And each blacksmith, in turn, became the teacher, passing down his knowledge, his patience, his strength. It was a chain that stretched back into time and forward into future, unbroken, as enduring as iron itself. The forge was therefore not only a place of labor, but a place of legacy. Its fire burned not for one man, but for all who came after. Its tools bore the marks of countless hands. Its anvil rang with the voices of generations. Apprenticeship ensured that the village would never lose its heartbeat, that the fire would never die, that the sparks would always dance. The blacksmith's craft was not merely work. It was inheritance, continuity, survival itself, carried from master to apprentice, from one dawn to the next. The forge was not only a place of labor, but a place of sensations. To step into it was to be surrounded, enveloped, and claimed by a world of sound, smell, and sight unlike any other in the medieval village. The fields carried the rustle of crops in the wind. The cottages smelled of bread and smoke. The market filled the eye with color and movement. But the forge was its own universe, alive with its unique symphony, its own air thick with memory, its own light cast by fire and sparks. It was here that the life of the blacksmith was most vividly experienced, not through words, but through the senses. The first impression was always sound. Even before one reached the doorway, the ringing of hammer upon anvil carried through the air, a sound clear and resonant, striking like a bell. It was steady, rhythmic, repetitive, yet never dull. Each strike had its own tone, sharp when the iron was thin, deep when the piece was thick, echoing when the blow was strong, muted when the hammer struck softly. The sound filled the forge, bounced from the walls, escaped into the village, reminding all who heard it that work was being done, that life continued, that survival was being shaped. It was a voice of reassurance, as familiar to the villagers as the crow of a rooster or the tolling of a bell. Within the forge, this ringing was joined by other sounds. The roar of the fire, fed by the steady sigh of the bellows, gave a low, constant accompaniment. It rose when the bellows pumped strongly, fell when they rested, but never disappeared entirely. The fire was alive, breathing in rhythm with the smith's foot or hand upon the bellows. The hiss of quenching followed often, sharp and sudden, as glowing iron plunged into water. Steam rose with a rush, filling the room with a sound as fleeting as it was intense, only to vanish as quickly as it came. Together, these noises wove a tapestry of labor: the roar, the ring, the hiss, the sigh. For those within the forge, these were not interruptions, but music, the steady background of their lives. The smaller sounds mattered too. The clink of tongs against the anvil, the creak of leather straps on the bellows, the rasp of a file smoothing an edge, the thud of a hammer set aside. Even footsteps across the floor carried their own note, softened by ash and dust. These were the quiet threads of the forge's symphony, overlooked by outsiders, but deeply familiar to those who worked within. To the apprentice, these sounds were lessons. The pitch of the hammer told him if the iron was ready. The hiss of quench told him when a blade was hardened. The sound of fire told him when more air was needed. The forge spoke constantly, and those who listened learned. The smells of the forge were equally unforgettable. They were strong, thick, sometimes overwhelming, but they belonged to the place as much as the tools or the fire. Smoke clung to every beam, every wall, every garment worn by the blacksmith. It was the smell of wood burned low, of charcoal glowing hot, of ash rising into the air. Beneath it lay the sharp, metallic scent of heated iron, a smell both biting and earthy that filled the nose and lingered on the skin. To a stranger, it might seem harsh, To the blacksmith, it was the perfume of labor, the mark of his calling. There was also the smell of sweat, constant in the heat of the forge. The blacksmith's body worked endlessly, his muscles straining, his skin damp. The air mixed the salt of sweat with the acrid bite of smoke and the metallic tang of iron, creating a blend that clung to him long after he left his workshop. His clothes bore it, his hair carried it, his very skin seemed steeped in it. Yet to him, it was not unpleasant. It was the scent of work completed, of days filled with purpose, of the dignity of toil. The quenching trough added its own sharp note. When hot iron plunged into water, the hiss came with a rising cloud of steam that carried the smell of scorched metal, a biting, almost sulfurous odor. The water grew dark with flakes of scale, its surface rippling with oil and soot, its smell heavy, damp, and burnt. To many, it was unpleasant, but to the smith, it was a familiar companion, the final breath of each piece before it was finished. It was the scent of iron made strong, the smell of work completed. The sights of the forge were perhaps the most mesmerizing. The fire glowed at the heart of the room, its flames leaping and curling, its coals shimmering with light. It was not the gentle flame of a hearth, but a fierce, demanding flame, hot enough to soften stone, bright enough to blind if stared at too long. Around it the light flickered, casting shadows that danced upon the walls, painting the beams in shades of orange and red. The forge was alive with this shifting light, a place where shadow and flame performed an endless dance. Then came the iron itself. When cold, it was dull, gray, heavy, unimpressive. But when lifted from the fire, it became something else entirely. Glowing red, then orange, then nearly white, it carried the brilliance of the sun itself. In the dimness of the forge, it looked like a piece of living flame, trembling and bright, moving in the grip of the tongs as though alive. To watch it was to see transformation, the moment when stubborn iron yielded to possibility. Children at the doorway gasped when they saw it, convinced they were witnessing magic. Even those who had seen it countless times felt a quiet awe, for it was never ordinary, always striking, always alive. The hammer strikes upon this glowing iron sent sparks into the air, a shower of fleeting light. They rose in arcs, curved through the shadows, faded to darkness. For a heartbeat, they filled the room like stars fallen from the heavens, only to vanish before they could be touched. The dance of sparks was endless, rising with each blow, each strike of necessity. To the blacksmith, they were part of his work, but to others, they were a vision, a brief reminder of beauty hidden in labor. The forge's light touched everything. The blacksmith's face, streaked with sweat, lit by fire. The apprentice's eyes, wide with concentration. The tools upon the walls, gleaming faintly as though alive. Even the smoke carried light within it, curling golden in the fire's glow before fading into the shadows of the rafters. The forge was not dark, but neither was it fully bright. It was a world of flickering half-light, where flame and shadow mingled endlessly, each one shaping the other. Together, the sounds, smells, and sights of the forge created an atmosphere that could never be forgotten. To step inside was to enter a world apart, a place where time seemed measured not by clocks, but by cycles of heat and hammer, hiss and spark. To live within it was to be claimed by it, to have one's senses filled each day with its symphony, its sense, its light. The blacksmith carried it with him always. Even when he left his forge, the smell clung to him. The sounds echoed in his memory. The glow of the fire seemed still upon his skin. He could no more leave it behind than he could leave behind his own breath. For the villagers, the forge was both familiar and mysterious. They knew its sounds, for they carried across the lanes. They smelled its smoke, drifting above the rooftops. They saw its sparks, glowing in the doorway at dusk. Yet for many, stepping inside was rare, and when they did, they felt the full weight of its presence. They understood, in that moment, that the forge was not merely a workshop but a living place, alive with senses, alive with purpose, alive with rhythm. And so the forge lived in sound, in smell, in sight. It was more than tools, more than fire, more than iron. It was a world in itself, shaping not only the metal that passed through it, but also the lives of all who depended on it. Its ringing voice, its acrid perfume, its glowing dance were part of the village as much as the fields, the cottages, the market square. The forge was alive, and through it, the blacksmith's life was written in every sense, every moment, every day. The life of a blacksmith was not lived apart from the rhythm of the natural world. His forge may have glowed with its own fire. His hammer may have rung with its own music, but outside his door the seasons shifted, and each season carried with it new demands, new labors, and new burdens. Just as the farmer's year was shaped by planting and harvest, so too was the smith's year shaped by what the land and its people required. The forge was never truly idle, but its work changed with the turning of the year. Its rhythm tied to the cycle of nature itself. Spring was a season of renewal, and with it came a flood of work that tested the endurance of the forge. The farmers returned to their fields after the stillness of winter, ready to turn the soil, plant seed, and trust again in the earth's generosity. Yet their plows had lain idle for months, dulled by last year's stones and worn by countless furrows. Their hoes had rusted in corners, their sickles had grown blunt, their cart wheels had cracked under the frost. They brought all of these to the blacksmith, whose fire and hammer gave them new life. His anvil rang from dawn until dusk with the sharpening of plowshares, the reforging of broken blades, the strengthening of hinges, the making of fresh nails. The village's hope for harvest rested upon tools made ready in spring, and the blacksmith bore that responsibility with steady patience that in springtime. The forge itself seemed to echo the world outside. While fields blossomed with green, the forge blossomed with sparks. While the air carried the scent of new flowers, the forge carried the sharp tang of heated iron. While farmers bent to the earth, the blacksmith bent to his anvil. Each stroke of his hammer a seed of survival planted in iron. Spring was not a season of rest. It was a season of preparation, and the forge was at the very center of it. Summer brought its own demands, different but no less heavy. The long days filled the fields with labor, and the smith's forge answered in kind. Sickles and scythes needed sharpening constantly, their edges worn by fields of grain. Hoes cracked under constant use, spades bent against roots, cartwheels broke under heavy loads of harvest. Farmers came daily, often in haste, for time could not be lost in the growing season. The blacksmith's hammer fell tirelessly, restoring edges, repairing breaks, shaping new tools when old ones failed beyond saving. His forge became a place of urgency, where villagers waited anxiously while he worked. Their livelihoods balanced on the speed and skill of his hands. The heat of summer pressed upon the forge with relentless force. Outside, the sun blazed high, and inside, the fire roared hotter still. The blacksmith labored in air thick with smoke and warmth, his body drenched in sweat, his lungs heavy with effort. Yet he endured, for the season demanded it. There was no time to rest, no time to falter. Summer was the season of growth, and growth needed tools, and tools needed the smith. His forge became as vital as rain, as sunlight, as soil itself. For without his labor the harvest could not be gathered. Autumn brought a different rhythm. The fields, once green, turned golden, and the harvest filled wagons and barns. The smith's work shifted with the season. Scythes and sickles still came for sharpening, but now carts crowded his doorway, their wheels worn from carrying loads of grain, their axles cracked under weight. Farmers brought hinges for barns, chains for storage, locks for doors. The forge rang with the making of nails and fittings, all necessary to hold the harvest safe against the coming winter. The smith's labor was not only about tools for work, but about tools for protection. Grain stored in barns meant survival, and the blacksmith's iron held those barns fast against storm and thief alike. Autumn was also a time when preparations for winter began. Travelers came seeking shoes for their horses. Carters brought wagons for reinforcement. Villagers asked for hooks and latches, hinges and locks. The forge turned its energy toward endurance, toward ensuring that the village could withstand the months of cold and scarcity. The smith knew that every hinge he made, every chain he forged, was part of the village's defense against winter's long night. Winter itself was different. The fields lay bare, the roads were quieter, the days shorter, the nights long. Yet the forge did not fall silent. It became, in some ways, more important than ever. With less farming to be done, villagers turned to repair what the year had worn down. Tools were brought for mending, weapons for sharpening, carts for reinforcement. Small household needs filled the smith's bench: knives for kitchens, locks for chests, hooks for hearths. The forge's rhythm slowed, but it never stopped. In winter, the forge was also a place of warmth. While the cottages burned small hearths, the blacksmith's fire roared with life, and villagers sometimes lingered at his doorway, grateful for the heat on their faces, the sight of sparks leaping in the gloom. The smith himself felt the burden of cold less than others, for his labor kept his blood warm and his body strong. Yet even he knew the hardship of the season, and his forge became a place where survival itself seemed to glow, where iron and flame pushed back the hunger and darkness of winter. The seasons shaped the smith, just as they shaped the village. In spring, he was a sower of iron, preparing tools for the year's labor. In summer, he was a tireless companion of growth, keeping edges sharp and tools sound. In autumn, he was a guardian of the harvest, forging strength to protect what had been gathered. In winter, he was a keeper of warmth, a mender of what had broken, a quiet flame against the cold. His forge did not exist apart from the seasons, but moved with them, its rhythm woven into the greater rhythm of nature. And so, the smith's work was not only about fire and iron, but about time itself. His hammer rang not just with strikes of metal, but with the turning of the year. His fire glowed not just for the peace at hand, but for the survival of the village through each season's trials. The forge was a calendar, its labor marking the passage of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, each with its own burdens, each with its own demands, each with its own rhythm. And through it all, the blacksmith stood steady, shaping iron as the seasons shaped life, his forge a small sun burning through the endless cycle of the year. When we think of the great forces that shaped medieval life, we might remember kings, castles, or battles. Yet, beneath those towering images, there was another strength, quieter, humbler, but just as enduring. It was found in the forge of the village blacksmith, in the steady rhythm of hammer and anvil, in the glow of fire that never failed, in the sparks that danced like fleeting stars. His work did not echo in chronicles or poems, but it lived in the furrows of fields, in the wheels of carts, in the hinges of doors, in the very survival of his community. The blacksmith's legacy was not glory but continuity. His hands, calloused and scarred, held the power to shape the tools that tilled the soil, harvested the grain, carried the harvest, and secured the homes. His strength was not measured in battles won, but in seasons endured. His fire did not destroy, but transformed. His labor was not fleeting, but lasting, passing from master to apprentice, from one generation to the next, unbroken through time. Even now, centuries later, the memory of the blacksmith lingers. The sound of iron ringing upon iron can still be imagined, the glow of fire still seen in the mind's eye, the smell of smoke and metal still felt in the imagination. His forge was more than a place. It was a heartbeat, one that pulsed quietly at the center of the medieval world. And though that world has long since changed, the hidden rhythms of iron and fire still whisper, reminding us of the quiet dignity of those whose labor built the foundation of survival. As you drift now into rest, Let the echoes of his hammer fade gently into silence. Let the glow of his fire soften into calm embers. Think of the patience, the strength, the endurance of a life lived not for grandeur, but for necessity. The blacksmith's forge may be still, its smoke long vanished, but its memory glows on, steady and eternal, a quiet rhythm in the story of the past and in the calm of your sleep tonight.